The first time I realized Sharon Whitmore had completely lost her grip on reality was the moment I stepped back into my machine shop and found her black Mercedes sitting right in the middle of my workspace like she just planted a flag and claimed the territory for herself. Not on my driveway, not halfway across a property line. I mean completely inside the building. For tires resting on my concrete floor, sunlight reflecting off the hood, engine ticking softly as it cooled down. For a second, I honestly thought I was looking at somebody else's property. My brain refused to process what my eyes were seeing. I had been outside for less than a minute, maybe 40 seconds. I walked out to grab a push broom leaning against the sidewall, and somehow, during that tiny window of time, my neighbor had decided my shop was now public parking. I looked up and saw Sharon already heading back toward the street. Same pearl earrings, same oversized sunglasses. Same little leather notebook she carried everywhere like it contained federal law. "Sharon," I called. She stopped, turned slowly, smiled. Not a normal smile either. One of those smiles people practice in the mirror because they think it makes them look important. "Why is your car inside my shop?" She glanced over her shoulder at the Mercedes, then back at me. "Oh, that's temporary." Temporary. Like she'd left a coffee cup on my counter. I actually laughed because I thought she had to be joking. She wasn't. "You weren't using the building," she said, "and the afternoon sun is brutal today." Now, before I go any further, you need to understand who Sharon Whitmore was. Every neighborhood has one person who slowly convinces themselves they're in charge of everyone else. In Cedar Ridge Estates, that person was Sharon. Officially, she was president of the Homeowners Association. Unofficially, she believed she was governor, mayor, judge, jury, and Supreme Court all rolled into one. She monitored lawns, measured fence heights, complained about garbage cans being visible from the road. One time she sent a 3-page email because somebody painted their front door a shade of blue she considered disruptive to neighborhood harmony. I wish I was exaggerating. Most people just nodded and apologized because arguing with Sharon was exhausting. The woman treated every disagreement like a constitutional crisis. Unfortunately for her, I wasn't most people. My name's Mason Carter. I build custom steel gates, trailer frames, and industrial fabrication projects for contractors around the county. I've worked with my hands my whole life. My shop sits behind my house near the edge of the subdivision. Everything is licensed. Everything is legal. Every permit is up to date. Still, Sharon hated it. She hated hearing grinders. She hated welding sparks. She hated delivery trucks. Most of all, she hated the fact that I never acted intimidated by her. For nearly 2 years, she'd been looking for a reason to put me in my place. That Friday morning, she thought she'd finally found one. The timing couldn't have been worse. Or maybe better. Depends on how you look at it. Because I was leaving town in less than an hour. A 4-day fishing trip I'd been planning for months. No customers. No phone calls. No Hawaii maze. Just a lake, a boat, and enough silence to reset my brain. Everything was packed. Coolers loaded. Rod strapped down. I was practically out the door. Then Sharon parked her Mercedes inside my building. "Move the car," I said. Her smile disappeared. Not completely. Just enough. The way a mask slips for a second. "My driveway is reserved today." Reserved for what? The Garden Society luncheon. Histoire de hair. The what? The Garden Society. She said it like those words were supposed to impress me. Then she pointed toward the car. "I'll retrieve it later. I'm leaving town." Then leave the building unlocked. I blinked. "What? You heard me." The confidence in her voice was almost impressive. Almost. "You want me to leave my entire workshop open for 4 days because you parked your car inside it?" She shrugged. A literal shrug. Then she said the sentence that changed everything. "It would be irresponsible to lock someone else's property inside." For a few seconds, neither of us spoke. Across the street, old Mr. Reynolds sat on his porch swing drinking coffee. 73 years old. Retired diesel mechanic. Didn't talk much. Didn't need to. He looked from Sharon to me, then gave the smallest nod I'd ever seen. That little nod said more than 100 words. It said she'd finally gone too far. And strangely enough, that's the exact moment I stopped being angry. Because anger clouds your thinking. Calmness sharpens it. I looked past Sharon, past her expensive car, past the open shop doors. and my eyes landed on the heavy steel tracks running along both sides of the commercial roll-up entrance. Then an idea quietly slipped into my head. Not revenge, not rage, just compliance. Pure compliance. I had already told Sharon I was locking my building before leaving town, and suddenly I realized something. I could do exactly that. The only question was whether Sharon fully understood what locking a building actually meant. At the time, I don't think she did, but she was about to find out. I didn't say another word after that. Sharon stood there waiting for an argument, probably expecting the same routine she'd gotten from everyone else in the neighborhood for years. A few raised voices, a threat, maybe some dramatic back and forth she could later retell as proof that she was the reasonable one. Instead, I simply turned around and walked back into the shop. "Mr. Carter," she called after me. "I expect professionalism." I almost laughed. Professionalism. The woman had just parked her car inside somebody else's building and was lecturing me about professionalism. Inside the shop, everything suddenly felt very quiet. The kind of quiet that settles in right before something important happens. I stood there for a moment, looking at the Mercedes sitting under the overhead lights. Perfect paint, perfect tires, perfect little hood ornament. Then my eyes moved to a stack of leftover structural steel tubing sitting beside a fabrication table. And that's when the idea stopped being an idea. It became a plan. Now, before anybody starts imagining some reckless act of revenge, understand something. I never touched her car, never scratched it, never moved it, never even leaned against it. The vehicle wasn't my problem. My building was. And I intended to secure my building before leaving town, just like I always did. I grabbed 4 sections of square tubing and dragged them toward the roll-up door tracks. The steel scraped across the concrete floor with a sound that echoed through the shop. Outside, Sharon was still talking. I could hear her voice drifting through the doorway. Something about HOA authority. Something about community standards. I wasn't listening anymore. A few minutes later, I lowered my welding helmet and struck the first arc. The bright blue flash lit up the entire building. Sparks scattered across the floor. Molten metal hissed and popped. The smell of hot steel filled the air. For the next 20 minutes, I welded heavy reinforcement bars directly across the door tracks, strong enough that nobody was lifting those doors without serious equipment. When I finished, I stepped back and admired the work. Professionally speaking, the welds were beautiful. Thick, clean, solid. Meanwhile, Sharon's Mercedes sat safely inside the building like a luxury exhibit in a museum nobody wanted. I locked the side entrance with a heavy-duty padlock, posted 2 bright warning signs. Private property, no unauthorized entry. Then I loaded the last of my gear into my truck and headed north toward Lake Hollow Creek. The entire drive felt lighter than it should have. Maybe because deep down I already knew what was coming. By late afternoon, I had camp set up beside the water. Tall pines, cool breeze, no traffic, no hoa meetings, no charon, just peace, at least for a couple of hours. Around 4:30, my phone buzzed. Motion alert from the security cameras. I opened the app, and there she was, right on schedule. Sharon marched into view wearing a pastel sweater and oversized sunglasses, followed by 2 women from her social committee, the unofficial royal court. All smiles, all confidence. That confidence lasted approximately 12 seconds. She clicked her key fob. Inside the building, the Mercedes chirped. Then she grabbed the roll-up handle. Nothing. She frowned, pulled harder. Nothing. One of her friends looked confused. The other looked nervous. Meanwhile, Sharon stared at the welded steel bars like she'd just discovered gravity. "What is this?" she shouted. I took a sip of beer beside the lake. Nature was beautiful that evening. The water barely moved. Birds drifted across the surface. And somewhere hundreds of miles away, Sharon Whitmore was beginning the worst weekend of her life. She marched to the side entrance, found the padlock, found the warning signs, then completely lost her composure. "Mason," she screamed. "Mason, open this building immediately." I don't think she understood something important. Steel doesn't care how loudly somebody screams. The louder she got, the more ridiculous the situation became. One of her friends finally pointed at the sign. "Maybe he's already gone." "He can't do this," Sharon snapped. He absolutely can, the other woman said quietly. That comment didn't help. For years, Sharon had operated under one basic assumption. People eventually gave in. Everybody did. Eventually, the moment somebody complained enough, threatened enough, embarrassed enough, people folded. This time nobody folded. The garage door stayed exactly where it was. Locked, secured, unimpressed. About 20 minutes later, another vehicle pulled into my driveway. County Sheriff's Department. I actually sat forward in my camping chair. This was getting interesting. A deputy stepped out. Young guy, probably late 20s. The kind of expression that says he's already dealt with too much nonsense today. Sharon practically sprinted toward him. Officer, thank goodness. The deputy looked at her, then at the building, then back at her. What seems to be the problem? My vehicle has been imprisoned. I nearly choked on my beer. Even the deputy blinked. Your vehicle has what? Been imprisoned. Inside that building? Yes. Did somebody steal it? No. Damage it? No. Move it? No. The deputy rubbed his forehead. I swear you could actually see him reconsidering career choices. Ma'am, why is your vehicle inside another person's building? Sharon straightened her shoulders. Because she genuinely thought she was about to win. According to neighborhood guidelines, the structure qualified as available shelter space. The deputy stared at her for several seconds. Just stared, then finally said, "That's not a thing." The look on Sharon's face was priceless. For the first time all day, she looked uncertain. The deputy walked around the property, examined the signs, looked through a side window. Eventually he came back. "Ma'am, this appears to be private property." "It is. And you voluntarily parked your vehicle inside." "Yes, but..." "And the owner secured his building." "Yes, but this is a civil matter." The silence afterward was beautiful. Absolute silence. The kind of silence that happens when reality finally catches up with somebody. "You need to open the building," Sharon insisted. "I cannot do that." "You need to force entry." "No." "You need to remove the lock." "No." "You need to do something." The deputy sighed. "Ma'am, I'm not breaking into somebody's building because you parked your car there." That sentence should have ended the conversation. It didn't. Because Sharon wasn't arguing with the deputy anymore. She was arguing with reality. And reality was winning. The second the sheriff drove away, everything changed. The polite neighborhood president act disappeared. The smile disappeared. The professional voice disappeared. What remained was pure frustration. She turned toward the garage, stared at it for several seconds, then did something so unbelievably stupid, I actually sat up in my chair. She kicked the steel door. Hard. Now remember something. Commercial steel door. Reinforced tracks. Industrial construction. And Sharon was wearing narrow designer heels. The impact echoed across the entire driveway. For one glorious second, she looked triumphant. Then the pain arrived. Her mouth opened. No sound came out at first. Then came a scream loud enough for the camera, a microphone to distort. One shoe launched into the grass. She hopped backward, trying to keep her balance. Missed, and fell sideways onto the lawn. Notebook flying. Papers everywhere. One friend gasped. The other simply covered her face. I laughed so hard I nearly dropped my phone into the lake. Not because she was hurt. Because the entire situation was absurd. Every second of it. And somehow that wasn't even the end. Because over the next 48 hours, things would get much, much worse for Sharon Whitmore. She just didn't know it yet. The funny thing is, most people would assume the story ended there. It didn't. Not even close. Because once somebody builds their entire identity around being in control, losing that control doesn't make them stop. It makes them desperate. Saturday morning, Sharon came back. Saturday night, she came back again. At one point, around midnight, the cameras caught her standing in my driveway wearing a bathrobe and slippers while another sheriff's supervisor calmly explained, for what was probably the third time, that law enforcement could not magically rewrite property rights because she regretted a decision she'd made herself. The next morning, she showed up with a relative carrying bolt cutters. That plan lasted about 30 seconds. The moment they looked through the side window and saw the steel reinforcements welded across the tracks, they both seemed to realize they were out of ideas. The bolt cutters never even left the truck. Meanwhile, my weekend was fantastic. I caught fish. cooked over a campfire, sat beside the lake watching sunsets. And every now and then, I'd check the security feed like it was a television show. By Sunday evening, I honestly felt more relaxed than I had in years. The stress I'd been carrying from work seemed gone. The noise in my head had quieted down. And somehow, strangely enough, Sharon had helped make that happen. Monday morning, I headed home. As I pulled into Cedar Ridge Estates, I noticed something immediately. The neighborhood felt different. Word had spread. People were outside, walking dogs, talking on driveways, watching, not openly, just enough. Everyone knew. When I turned onto my street, old Mr. Reynolds was already sitting on his porch swing, coffee in one hand, that familiar grin on his face. "Good trip?" he asked. "Best one I've had in years." He chuckled. "You're going to enjoy the next part." That was all he said. I grabbed my angle grinder for the truck bed and walked toward the shop. Across the street, Sharon stood at the edge of her driveway watching me. Gone were the sunglasses. Gone was the confidence. Gone was the neighborhood queen routine. She looked exhausted, like somebody who hadn't slept properly in days. For a second, I almost felt sorry for her. Almost. Without saying a word, I unlocked the side entrance and stepped inside. A few moments later, the grinder roared to life. Bright sparks exploded across the floor as I cut through the first weld. Then the second. Then the third. Outside, several neighbors had quietly appeared. Nobody spoke. Everybody watched. 10 minutes later, the final steel brace dropped onto the concrete with a loud metallic crash. I walked over to the door, grabbed the handle, and slowly rolled it upward. Fresh air rushed into the building. Sunlight spilled across the floor. And there sat Sharon's Mercedes exactly where she'd left it. Safe. Untouched. Perfect. Sharon practically ran past me. She yanked open the driver's door, dropped into the seat, and pressed the ignition button. Nothing. The engine didn't even try. She pressed it again. Nothing. A third time. Still nothing. I watched her expression change. Confusion. Concern. Then panic. She stepped out of the car and looked at me. "You touched it." "No." "Then why won't it start?" I leaned against the doorway. Then I remembered something. Friday afternoon, right before leaving, I noticed faint dashboard lights glowing through the windshield. At the time, I hadn't thought much about it. Now it all made sense. "When you parked it," I said, "I think you left the electronics in accessory mode." Her face slowly drained of color. 3 days. 3 full days. The battery never stood a chance. The realization hit her all at once. Every problem, every argument, every sheriff visit, every embarrassing moment, every ounce of stress she'd experienced over that weekend. All of it started with one decision. Her decision. Nobody forced her. Nobody tricked her. Nobody set a trap. She simply assumed the rules didn't apply to her. In reality, had handed her the bill. "I need roadside assistance," she muttered. I nodded. "Probably." Then I glanced toward Mr. Reynolds. "Got jumper cables?" Without missing a beat, he took a sip of coffee. "Nope." Complete lie. The man had 3 sets hanging in his garage. I had personally helped him organize them. But some moments are too perfect to interrupt. I wished Sharon good luck and headed inside. That was the last real confrontation we ever had. The next morning, the Mercedes was gone. A few weeks later, Sharon officially resigned from the HOA board, citing personal stress and health concerns. After that, something unexpected happened. The neighborhood got better. People relaxed. Kids played outside more. Neighbors started talking again. The endless complaint emails disappeared. The atmosphere changed. Not overnight, but steadily. And over time, I found myself thinking less about the garage and more about what the whole situation actually meant. Because honestly, this was never about a parking spot. It was never about Mercedes. It wasn't even about an HOA. It was about boundaries. Some people spend so many years getting their way that they start confusing compliance with respect. Those are not the same thing. Compliance disappears the moment consequences arrive. Respect stays. The people who demand authority the loudest are often the ones most afraid of discovering how little authority they truly have. And Sharon learned that lesson the hard way. Do I hate her? Not really. If anything, I feel a little sorry for her. Imagine building your entire identity around controlling other people only to realize none of that control was ever real. That's a painful thing for anyone to face. Still, if I'm being honest, every now and then I walk past those garage tracks and notice the faint marks where the welds used to be. And I can't help smiling. Not because somebody lost, not because somebody got embarrassed, but because for one strange weekend, reality finally became stronger than entitlement. And reality won without ever raising its voice. Now I'm curious what you think. Was I right to lock the building and leave for my trip, or should I have handled it differently? Have you ever dealt with a neighbor, manager, HOA official, family member, or coworker who believed the rules only applied to everyone else? Drop your story in the comments below. I read every single one. And trust me, I have a feeling Sharon isn't the only person like that living in America.